Friends, today we again continue with our what we left in the last class, and that is to discuss about the Bodo movement. We already talked about the origin of the Bodos, how they gradually evolved into one of the most dominant tribal groups in the region, particularly in the state of Assam. And in the last class, we also talked about how the Bodo movement was rooted in colonialism, primarily because their authority, their power, and the consolidated strength of the Bodos was suppressed and taken away by the British at the time when their kingdom was already declining. So before we go into the whole issue of the Bodo movement, we must understand that ethnic identity has always been the key issues of mobilization of all diverse communities in northeast India. So in the case of the Bodos, although the Bodos have had a glorious past from their ancient ancestry and have always been proud about it, British colonialism, as I said before, have put them into the crossroad. After the assassination of Raja Gobind Chandra in 1832, the Bodo kingdom in Kachar fell and it was annexed by the British. With this event in the history of the Bodos, the feeling of marginalization started among them. They became worried about their future and soon developed the fear of being subsumed and submerged under other dominant cultures. Therefore, it is appropriate to argue that colonialism created a situation where Bodos saw themselves as a community in opposition to other communities. When I say this, it is important for us to understand that the Bodos that saw themselves as the emerging power in this particular region, but after the arrival of the Britishers, they found themselves as a community not only already deprived of their power and authority, but also as a community who has to locate themselves against the existing other communities in this particular region. And what we need to understand is, even in the period after independence, the newly emerging Bodo elites realized, along with the other educated class, that something has been already taken away from them, and therefore they started using this as an issue to articulate their political aspiration for autonomy. The question of land alienation, social, economic backwardness became the weapon to defy the Assamese dominance within Assam state. Therefore, the Bodo movement have had different forms of articulation, which has always been grappled between the demand for autonomy within Assam and the demand for separate state outside of Assam, which has been witnessed at different phases of the history of the Bodo movement. At certain point of time, even this movement has turned out to be a movement for secession from the Indian state. To begin with, the process of marginalization of the Bodos, which began, as I said before, during colonial period, has always been continuing even after the post-independence times with the burgeoning Assamese nationalism. The movement for autonomy among the Bodos, of course, started during the pre-independence time with the demand for separate homeland through the formation of what we all know as the All Assam Plain Tribal League in 1933. This is very important because we must see this as the beginning of the Bodo movement. And later, after independence, the aspiration of the tribal people was consolidated together through another tribal organization, like the Bodo Sahitya Sabha, formed in 1952, and then the Plain Tribal Council of Assam, and in 1967, the formation of the All Bodo Students Union uh, became significant, especially in the pursuit, along with the hill tribes of Northeast India, which formed themselves for the political movement for self-determination. So, therefore, what began as a common political, common political leadership between the APSU and the PTCA was soon later divided when APSU withdrew support to the PTCA in 1979 with the allegations that the latter has failed to attain statehood for the Bodos during the reorganization process of Assam. Later, a person known as Upendra Brahma became the president, and with him being the president of the APSU, or the or the All Bodo Student Union, the Bodo movement was catapulted into a democratic mass movement based on Gandhian non-violence. The main agenda, therefore, of the newly crafted movement was to demand for the 50-50 division of Assam in order to create a Bodoland within the Indian Union and not within Assam. This is one of the significant turn of event when the Bodos actually started articulating that Assam is not only for the Assamese, but Assam has to be divided between between the Assamese or the Bodos and the non-Bodo population. So therefore, the Bodo nationalism is now drawn from one of contestation against the Indian state, as I told you earlier, to that of struggle against Assamese domination. This change of stance, occurred because the APSU, which was formed, on the lines of the ASU, felt betrayed within the Indian Union by the Assam state and the leadership of the ASU. Although, the constitutional provisions of the 6th schedule provided for the formation of the autonomous councils, but what made the Bodos actually felt betrayed was that in 1952, when the constitutional committees went around, to seek for opinions from various tribal groups in the Northeast region, the report of the Commissioner of Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes suggested that such institutional arrangements within the 6th scheduled, should be made and can be made only for tribals in the forest or in the hills. The Bodos, who by this time, and having been the dominant force, the dominant community in the region and within Assam, they have already transformed themselves into an agricultural community, occupying the plains of Kokrajhar, Udalguri, Darang, and of course other plain districts of Assam. Therefore, having been engaged in the main economic activity of the region, they saw this aspect of being driven away from the 6th scheduled, or driven away from the institutions that could be created under the provisions of the 6th schedule, as a misfortune, and they felt that it was intentionally devised by the Assam state to actually disempower them more and to divide them in order that their consolidated power, their consolidated strength could be dismembered into various parts of Assam. It is in this context, therefore, that the Bodos were forced to consolidate their political aspiration into the position of demand for separate state of Bodoland. So, therefore, as I said before, from something which emerged out of anti-colonial force into the whole idea of questioning whether they should be part of the Indian Union. Now the movement is gradually transforming itself into a movement against the the Assamese hegemony, the Assamese dominance, and therefore purging for themselves a new political narrative, and that is to divide Assam into 50-50 and also to demand for separate state from the existing state of Assam. This idea of Bodo nationalism, or the whole idea of Bodo nationalism, can therefore be argued that it has its roots apart from the anti-colonialism force, and it has its roots in many other things, but it must be understood that it began with the general feeling of neglect, exploitation, alienation, and discrimination of the Bodos, which was certainly born out of the economic and the social cultural backwardness that the population was exposed to, especially after British occupation and in the aftermath of India's independence. Therefore, one can say that the emerging politics of Assamese assimilation imposed upon all tribes in Assam, especially in the 1950s and 60s and so on and so forth, in many ways ensued with mistrust and uncertainty among all the tribal population in Assam. And therefore we have seen, while on the one side the Khasis was fighting or struggle or was leading the movement for hill state movement, then we have the Mizos also articulating the same. We have the Nagas who were fighting for self-determination, and so on and so forth. And of course, the other Kacharis, the Dimasas also, articulating different forms of institutions, particularly demanding for separate hill state. So therefore, the issue of preservation of cultural heritage, the question of the language and identity was becoming a major threat among all the tribes in Assam. Therefore, along the lines of all other tribal communities of Assam, the Bodo elite and the educated middle class began to establish their social and political platform to consolidate their political aspiration to address the issues concerning the community, and gradually therefore this emerged into one of the largest and the longest struggles for autonomy and statehood in northeast India. Having said all this, we must also take note that the Assam movement, that was the struggle against illegal migration in Assam, for some time brought the ASU and the APSU on a common political agenda, and that political agenda was to evict all non-tribals from essentially tribal belts and tribal blocks in Assam. The outcome, therefore, of the struggle in the form of the Assam Accord addressed this issue, of course, through Clause 10, which actually mentioned about the habitation of tribal belts. However, Clause 6 of the Assam Accord promised safeguards to protect the cultural identity of the Assamese people. And this is something that has been misinterpreted for a very, very long time in the history of the Assam state and in the history of the Bodo movement, along with many other movements in Assam. The misinterpretation of this clause by the Assamese dominant political class as being the legitimacy of the Assamese to impose Assamese language and culture upon non-Assamese population, including the Bodos, made this synergy between the Asu and the Apsu to fall apart, to break, and the Bodos therefore felt betrayed by the Asu as the Assam Accord, they say, has failed to protect and to address their worries of apprehensions. Therefore, this resulted in the movement taking a violent turn, leading to the Bodo Assamese clashes in the late 1980s. The demand for autonomy was therefore intensified into the demand, as I said, for separate state. Militant groups like the Bodo Security Force, which later was renamed as the National Democratic Front of Bodoland, was formed, and they demanded for accession from India. That is primarily because they thought that while they are struggling against the Assamese hegemony, the Indian state was not serious enough in trying to find ways and means to resolve this whole conflict. So therefore, as I said, there was an emerging separatist ideology which therefore was nurtured by some section of the leadership of the movement with powerful impact that was rooted, as I said earlier, in a deep sense of alienation arising out of Assamese hegemony. So therefore, under all these situations and under such environment, the Bodos, who were once the autochthones or the first inhabitants of Assam, they started deriving their politics out of the ideology of nativism and revivalism. Nativism here means that they were the native, they were the native population that have occupied Assam. And revivalism here therefore means that they want to revive their identity, they want to revive their culture, they want to revive their language, and therefore they want to revive their dominant position within the Assam state. And therefore often these were politically articulated in a process of liberation. On the one side, liberation from the Assamese hegemony, as I said. On the other side, liberation from the power of control that were actually suppressing them. So therefore, for the Bodo leadership, political autonomy within the context of Bodoland meant that there is scope for removing their deprivation, for removing their sense of being deprived, the sense of being alienated, the sense of being backward, the sense of being marginalized within the larger Indian context. So one can say that the Bodo movement was therefore meant for the distribution of power through, we may say, through the middle level structural changes or through the overall structural changes. And the main purpose of this was to achieve through the system of differential allocation of resources, with the Bodos being considered as the sole owner of in areas under their jurisdiction. So this is the context of the whole, the theoretical context of the whole emerging Bodo nationalism, which, as I said, was which could be juxtaposed between the question of liberation, the question of secession, and the question of autonomy, within and outside the state of Assam. Now coming to the whole, a very brief discussion on the different phases of the Bodo movement. I will not be able to go into the detail, and that is primarily because, as I told you earlier, it's really difficult to upload the videos if it is too long. So therefore, let me discuss in brief that the Bodo about the phases of the Bodo movement by arguing, therefore arguing that Bodo nationalism and the movement of the Bodo nationalism have had various phases, of course, from the time after their authority was shattered by the British till the present time. So therefore, the first phase of the Bodo movement, I prefer to start this by looking at the context of the emerging Bodo identity, formation of Bodo identity into the whole context of the present day Bodo Peace Accord, which was signed in early 2020. So as I said, the first phase of the Bodo movement started with the effort of the Bodo middle class to consolidate and establish their formal organization for the purpose of pursuing issues of the Bodos through political party in order that their interests would be articulated. This first phase, therefore, may be called as the phase of political awakening, which, to my understanding, began in 1933 and it lasted till 1966. This is the phase when the Bodo started consolidating their political resources. This is the phase when they started establishing platforms for themselves. This is the phase when they started, responding to the whole idea of whether they should be part of India or they should assert themselves as people, having their own unique political history within the context of the Indian nationalism. So, so therefore, this phase of political awakening, which began in 1933 and lasted till 1966, is a phase when the Bodo people, when the Bodo political class actually started, inserting this idea that Bodos should have their own political future. Bodos should have the capacity to decide on their own political future. The second phase is the period when the movement for autonomy was articulated from 1967 to 1986. Although this phase is represented by struggle of groups employing violence as a means to achieve their goal, this is also a phase when such movement actually gained momentum, and this is the phase when various other questions of how to organize, what is the level of organization of the people, what is the strategy. This is the phase when the Bodo started questioning as to what extent they should articulate themselves, whether within the context of autonomy, within the context of secessionism, or within the context of demanding for separate state itself. So this is a very controversial, or not necessarily controversial, but this is a phase where there are contestations about the idea of Bodo nationalism. So as I said, this is the phase also when various groups started articulating whether they should use violence or they should adopt non-violence. Okay, so this can I call as the second phase of the Bodo movement. The third phase is the period from 1987 to 1992. You may have a look by yourself into the chronicles of the events that took place during this particular period. But in brief, I can say this period was characterized by open and persistent demands for autonomy. This period is also significant as the APSU took over the leadership of spearheading the movement from the PTCA. This is primarily because the APSU felt that the PTCA was not leading the movement in the right direction. As I mentioned earlier, they felt betrayed because the PTCA could not address the concern of the Bodos, particularly during the reorganization of the Assam state, during the movement during the Hill State movement within Assam. So this is, as I said, the third phase, and a very significant phase, especially because the political leadership shifted from the PTCA to the APSU. The fourth phase is the phase between the period of 1992 to 2003. This is the phase which is marked by large-scale demonstration and agitation, which in short resulted in the signing of the first Bodo Accord. This is a very, very important phase, and the accord, however significant it might have been, instead of bringing peace, it led to more violence. Soon after, due to various ambiguities with the terms of agreement of the accord and the various lapses, especially in power sharing in the newly formed Bodo Autonomous Council. So therefore one can see that on the one hand there was an institutional Bodo people was being given the institution to govern for themselves, yet as I said, because of various ambiguities, because of various lapses in power sharing, which means that certain subjects which should have been given to the Bodo Autonomous Council was still in the hands of the Assam state, and therefore this, as I said, instead of bringing in peace, it led to more violence, and this phase further therefore led to yet another low intensity conflict in the region till the second Bodo Accord was signed in 2003. In 2003 another Bodo Accord was signed. So the Bodo movement did not end with the second accord, but it continued even after the Bodo Liberation Tigers was disbanded and the Bodo Autonomous Council was upgraded to Bodo Territorial Council in 2003 through the 2003 accord. While with this accord, 2003 accord, former BLT leaders, Bodo Liberation Tigers leaders, took over the administration of the Bodo Territorial Council. The significance of that is still even felt till today in the Bodo areas. This phase is also significant in the history of the Bodo movement, as it is also manifested, with the maturing of leadership among the Bodos, when significantly to be noted is that the NDFB themselves, they agreed for dialogue with state agencies, and they came forward with the ceasefire agreement in order to sit down to dialogue and to reach to more congenial, more acceptable piece of legislation. Another very important substantial achievement of this phase is the formation of an umbrella organization known as the Bodo National Conference, or BNC, Bodo National Conference, which comprised of all Bodo groups to strengthen and to bring about a holistic approach to the demand for the separate state of Bodoland. So therefore this is the way forward. This is the changes of events that have taken place throughout the history of the Bodo movement. And let me cut the story short. You know, all through the latest movement in the latest development in the Bodo movement is the Bodo Peace Accord, which was signed in the early period of this year. You know, in the almost the beginning of before the lockdown, so you can say, between the APSU, the four factions of the National Democratic Front of Bodoland, the Assam government, and the Union Home Ministry. So it is the tripartite agreement, so to say: Assam State, the Indian government, and the representatives of the Bodos. So this accord, again, rather than enabling for the creation of the Bodo state, it empowered the population with the creation of a unique institution, called the Bodo Regional Council within the state of Assam. What is the significance of this BRC? The significance of this is that with this unique, with the unique power given to the BRC, the agreement also sought to ensure the safety of Bodo language, culture, and the regional concern of the Bodos. This institution, BRC, is empowered with what is known as the satellite institutions with satellite jurisdiction in areas outside BTAD and occupied by Bodos, in order to to empower this institution to protect the Bodos' ethnic, social, cultural, and linguistic identities with legislative protection for the land rights of the tribals, and to also ensure quick development of tribal areas. So which means basically means that with the 2020 accord, what we see is that the BTAD is upgraded, and this institution does not only have power within in areas where the Bodos are in majorities, or within the territory of the BTAD, but even beyond their own territory. So wherever there are Bodos are in majority, this institution will have the satellite jurisdiction and administration, and therefore this is a latest development, you can say, in the context of Indian federalism. So therefore this accord is also therefore expected to usher in peace, while it provides political and economic benefits to the tribal areas, while, as I said, retaining the territorial integrity of the state of Assam. This agreement also it also proposes to sort of set up a commission under Section 14 of the 6th Schedule to the Constitution of India, which will recommend the inclusion and exclusion of tribal population residing in areas adjoining BTAD areas, which means this commission will therefore see whether in areas under BTAD, but the population of the Bodos are very few, whether BTAC will have jurisdiction or will have power there, or maybe a different sort of institution will be created for the non-Bodo population, as well as in non-Bodo, in non-BTAD areas where the Bodos are residing, and but the jurisdiction does not fall under the BTAC. Therefore, the BTAC will have, as I said already, satellite jurisdiction. So therefore, the government of Assam is also expected to set up or to establish a Bodo Kachari Welfare Council as per the existing procedures. This will include, therefore, the notification that the government of Assam will come out with in order to notify Bodo language as an associate official language in the state of Assam, and with this therefore to also set up a separate directorate of Bodo medium schools in therefore in the Bodo and non-Bodo areas. So in short, as we are already exceeding the time, we must say that in the context of the events that have taken place, the history of the Bodos is indeed a history of the post-colonial resistance of small ethnic nationality. The major concern throughout has always been the preservation of identity, which is so inextricably tied up with land and territory. So land, territory, culture, language, identity are the major, are the key points, the key agenda of the Bodo movement. So, in conclusion, I can say that the issue of uncertainty and insecurity emerging in the post-colonial period under the Indian state has resulted therefore in successive waves of violence in the Bodo areas, and also the efforts of the Bodos, efforts made by the Bodos to contain this violence, to reach to a very acceptable agreement within the state of Assam and within the Indian context. And therefore, while of course there are experts in this issue that have always argued that that Bodo militancy has its roots in the paternalistic attitude of the Assamese Hindu caste elite, taking the coup from the British administration. It is therefore important for us as students to understand that, like many other movements, or like the Bodo movements, every movements in tribal areas are movements that are concerned with land, with the territory, with their language, identity, and therefore to every community, to every state, contextualizing conflict, contextualizing institutions for resolving conflict has to go hand in hand with the whole idea of how to resolve all these issues by ensuring that land, identity, language of the people have to be respected, preserved, and confidence has to be built in these areas in order to preserve the historical association of all these communities within the Indian state. So with this I conclude my lecture today. I hope to continue again after some time with some other important topics from this particular syllabus and from the other syllabus. Anyway, thank you very much, and in case you have any observation, you want to ask any questions, you want to discuss more about this, you are always welcome. Please feel free to do so by commenting in the Google Classroom or in the WhatsApp, and or maybe by sending your queries. I have already sent you I have sent materials to almost all the students who have asked for materials, and I request all those students to kindly share those materials so that everyone else will have access to those materials, especially during this difficult times when we are not able to meet each other. Thank you very much.